Okay, we're delighted to be joined on the Premier View podcast this week by our favourite Clare woman, Lauren Gulfoyle. You're very welcome, Lauren.
That's a lovely introduction. Your favourite Clare woman, thank you.
Well, we wouldn't have too many favourite Clare people in Tip, so I suppose you mightn't have much competition. But Lauren is from Feakle in County Clare, a physiotherapist by trade. You might give us a bit of background. How did you get into physiotherapy, or what was the thought process behind doing that course?
I suppose from all my life, really, I was very much involved in GAA and sport, and I also had a very deep interest in how the body works, and how it moves and how we kind of come back from injury. So I suppose as my dad got more and more involved with Clare teams and training different teams, my brother was playing for Clare, going to games, and I suppose it was a way for me to kind of combine my two interests of sport and then kind of the human body as such. And I think probably subconsciously I was kind of deciding that it was a way to get into that world, even though I wasn't male and I wasn't overly gifted at the playing side of things. So that's probably where the interest started. I also kind of suffered a bit of back pain when I was a teenager, and I'm the type of person that will need to understand my problems. So that probably fueled my interest as well in physiotherapy. So yeah, that was kind of where the interest started. And then I very much wanted to get into the sports side of things and to hopefully work in sport full time. And I've achieved that, which is amazing. So yeah.
No, great. So you mentioned your dad. Your dad obviously played for Clare from 84 to 94. He went out with a bang, scoring 2 goals against Tip in 94. But obviously he had to finish up through injury. Was that something you were aware of growing up, that hip injury ended his career? And was that a focus for you when you were going on to do physiotherapy?
Well, I'd say he might dispute you there now, saying it was an injury that ended his career. I think it was more Ger man's opinion ended his career.
We'll get into that later on.
Bone of contention there, especially in that it was 94 and they won the All-Ireland in 95. But yeah, like even Dad would have obviously picked up a couple of injuries throughout his playing career. His hip, as you mentioned, being one of those, and he's since had a replaced actually in the last couple of years. He lasted a long while with it. And my brother as well. So my brother would have actually torn his ACL when he was 14. So I would have been 11 at the time. So I would have seen him going through that process. I would have kind of tagged along to his physio sessions, and it just was something that really interested me. So yeah, I do think their experiences probably had an input. We wouldn't have talked massively. With that being said, now Dad would complain massively about his injuries and his different things. So it probably was kind of a topic of discussion throughout the years. And my uncle as well, Michael, would have played and sustained many injuries down the line. So yeah, probably that may have influenced most definitely. But I think my brother's ACL injury when he was a teenager, and so was I, was probably where it really started, because I very much understood, I suppose, the role a physio plays in that kind of period in someone's life, and also how important a physio is to the overall workings of a team. So I'd say his injury probably was the most influential part of it, yeah.
Very good. So, yeah, you kind of touched on it there. Injury prevention is obviously huge in the GAA at the moment. It's like one of the buzzwords that's going around. Do you think that coaches and managers, do they take enough care on the load that's placed on, I suppose, especially young players? And you've been involved with the Tip minors. You would have seen, I suppose, the pressure and the load that those guys are under. Do you think managers take that into account, or is there more that we can do in the GAA on that level?
I think it might be a little bit, it might be asking too much of managers to have a real in-depth understanding of loading and kind of how to structure sessions and structure blocks of sessions. So I think this is, it's important to kind of bring in people around you that do have that skill set or have that know-how and knowledge. So bringing in a good S&C coach, having a physio that's very vocal, I suppose, when it comes to management sessions. But I do think at times managements can be naive to the impact that let's say strenuous training or high intensity training over long periods of time can actually have on athletes. So yeah, I think like in the olden days, in times gone by, you know, training lads hard would have been seen as kind of the way to get them fit, the way to kind of build some mental resilience. But I think times have progressed, and we do now understand that maybe working in shorter bouts, or pre-planning our sessions, and the loading that's going to happen in those sessions, and kind of planning the couple of weeks, I suppose, as well. So it isn't just individualized sessions, that we can actually get more from our players with regards to those sessions themselves. And I think as well, from an injury prevention perspective, that it's a case of, you know, not kind of training lads like they're dogs and just kind of picking the couple of guys that make it through those hard sessions, that some guys potentially aren't going to acclimatise well to those heavy lows. And we've seen it throughout kind of the last 2-3 years with the tip minors. Some players are more durable than others, and some of those players might be coming from C clubs as opposed to players coming from A clubs. So guys that will be playing lower division hurling just haven't been exposed to that high intensity work. So when they come in, they're very good hurlers, but they just have, their bodies haven't adapted to that amount of training. And I think this year probably, or last year I should say now, put a huge spotlight on planning training sessions and planning blocks of training sessions, because we had very limited time with players before championship, once lockdowns were lifted or dropped. And I saw firsthand a couple of players didn't feature in championship with Tipperary this year because of that short run-in. They went from having very little activity to having a lot of activity, and unfortunately they broke down and they didn't have enough time. So yeah, I do think it's probably asking an awful lot of managers to have that understanding. But I think what they should be doing is bringing in people around them, or asking for help when it comes to planning these sessions, and then kind of delegating out the responsibility.
Yeah, so just talking about load management and session planning, and I suppose player planning. I don't know whether you're aware, you probably would have come up with the minors, but like the dual player issue is a big problem here in Tipperary, and that a lot of our good hurlers are good footballers as well, and there'll be a bit of to and fro, and there was a decision taken within TIP that only 4 players from like 14, 15 years old could be dual players. What's your opinion from I suppose a physiotherapy or a strength and conditioning point of view? As is a dual player, is that something that we can have going forward, or is the day of the dual player at the elite level gone now?
It's multifactorial, really, isn't it? If there is appropriate and adequate communication between management, then yes, it is doable. But I think the question here is underage elite sport very much success driven? Is it outcome driven? Are we looking to collect trophies, or are we looking to develop players? And I think it stems back to that. And I suppose like the minor hurling manager and the minor football manager, that they both want to go out and win. So they're not going to be concerned with the other team's desires, I suppose. So I think it stems back to that. And it can be very hard to kind of have players at training and not see them visibly training, I suppose. And this is what's needed, you know, if players are going to be involved in both panels, it takes a serious amount of communication to understand not only what that player is doing at county minor level, but what they're doing with their schools. Are they dual players with their schools? Are they playing dual with their clubs? I've had this headache for 3 years. I must have gone through, I don't know how many Panadol packs, because I'm trying to keep track of what they're doing club-wise, school-wise, and I've often had to kind of be in discussion with schools managers, club managers, because I suppose I'm kind of coming from the outside in. I don't have any say biases when it comes to Tipperary or to whatever it might be. I'm very much there with the athlete's health in mind, but I think communication is key to that, and motivations for these different setups is key to that. So yeah, I do think it is possible if we were to just look at it from a physical loading perspective, but I think it's the circus that kind of surrounds elite sport that probably is making it harder and harder. And I know from a GAA perspective, obviously hurling and football are under the one umbrella, and that makes it a little bit easier from a fixtures perspective. Like we do see issues with camogie and ladies football, but I think it is doable. Just I think it is quite hard in this era because it is very outcome driven.
Yeah. So you had said earlier on about guys that you'd seen picking up injuries because they had come from, I suppose, not a good training base. But we're obviously in COVID times, guys haven't been doing, I suppose, the level of training. Do you expect that when we do start back up, which is now looking like possibly the middle of April, that if we go into competition, I suppose it's probably at the elite level, that we'll see more injuries because you don't have that training base before you go into the game-based scenarios?
Yeah, absolutely. And we've already seen that last year. There is a little bit of data that's already come out in terms of the Bundesliga, where there was a significant increase in injuries sustained in those games after lockdown. And that was only, I think, a 6-week drop off initially. And then from a GAA perspective, I actually collected data myself with regards to injury from inter-county GAA players. And I think it was just over 300 athletes at the return to play phase, so in about September time, and 1/3 of those sustained an injury upon return to play, and 70% of that was non-contact, which means it was our muscular type injuries, our training load related issues, training error related issues. And I would have asked them as well as to kind of reasons why they believe they were injured. And a huge percentage of them was time away from the game, not having access to appropriate facilities, congestion of matches, increased intensity of games, lack of recovery. There's a huge multitude of reasons there that are modifiable and are changeable and are avoidable. But I suppose there's a lot of factors coming into play here. And as well, remember, athletes at that point anyway, we're returning to clubs first, and we're not going to have the support systems at play in club scenarios that we would have at inter-county. So yeah, I most definitely do think we will see an increase in injuries. I remember GAA was only back maybe 2 or 3 weeks, and I'd heard of 4 Achilles tendon ruptures, and that would be so unheard of. In the club that I'm working with at the moment here in Cork, we had an Achilles tendon rupture, an ACL rupture, and an ankle dislocation, and that happened in 3 games. So yeah, like as much as we want, we can't replicate the demands of competitive sport. Down on the pitch with a couple of cones, it's very different from what will actually happen in competitive sport. And then we're adding in contact, we're adding in fatigue, we're adding in an awful lot of factors. So hopefully now, I know they haven't announced it just yet, but hopefully the lead in 2 games this time will be a little bit longer. There may not be as much congestion of fixtures, and hopefully coaches will be paying a little bit more attention to how they're actually bringing players back up to that level of play.
Yeah, you spoke about the ACLs and Achilles injuries. What do you consider to be the 3 most common injuries that GAA players pick up, and is there anything that they can do? Is it just a case of strength and conditioning and injury prevention to reduce the incidence of those injuries?
The most common, it would change slightly between hurling and football, but hamstring injuries account for about 25% of all GAA injuries. Then you've got ankle injuries, and then after that, probably would it be a mixture kind of, I suppose, hurling, you'd be seeing shoulder type injuries. And from a football perspective, it might be thumb injuries. The one behavioural thing I would change when it comes to GAA players and injuries is reporting them earlier and getting the very early management correct. I don't know how many times people come into me a couple of days after a championship match and they've hurt their hamstring and they've been stretching it and foam rolling it. And I'm like, you've probably made that a lot worse because you just didn't know what to do in the early stages. And yeah, and as well as that, just I don't know, I feel like I've started to work in rugby a little bit more, and there's definitely a difference in the culture with injuries in rugby, where it's kind of expected that you will be injured, so you're just accepting of the fact that you won't be able to train or play. Whereas in GAA, there's definitely a mentality of, I'm playing this whether my leg's hanging off or not. So I think, yeah, just the behaviour around kind of acceptance of injury, which I know is easier said than done. From a prevention perspective, like, it depends really on the type of injury. So for hamstring, for example, exposure to high speed running is paramount. So that's actually getting out and getting very fast meters under the belt consistently throughout the week, and that's so our body adapts to that type of running, that we're not only getting exposed to that in a game scenario. So yeah, it depends really on the type of injury, but yeah, there definitely is a couple of things that we can be addressing and modifying depending on the issue at hand.
Just when you mentioned hamstrings, I don't know, did you watch the Toughest Trade? But when Michael Murphy went to Claremont, I think it was, and they stacked him up against the rugby players in Claremont. He was up there on every attribute that the rugby player was, except for hamstrings. His hamstrings were by far a lot weaker than those guys. Is there something, I suppose, from a juvenile level up that we can be doing in the GA to make sure that like Murphy is obviously one of the best footballers, if not the best footballer in the country, and to go out there and them to tell him that he's up there as a professional athlete only for his hamstrings. You know, is there something better we can be doing from an early age to strengthen those?
Increasing our eccentric hamstring strength is definitely one feature, and like a Nordic hamstring curl is a very simple way to achieve that. So that's where you're down on your knees and you're falling forwards and you're controlling your descent with your hamstrings. I actually saw Podge Collins do it a couple of years ago at an event I was working at, and he just astounded everyone with his eccentric strength. It was incredible. But that's one thing. So that I'm pretty sure that's part of the GA 15 warm-up. So eccentric strength. So basically when we're sprinting and our legs and our knees are coming up in front of us, that's our hip flexors and our quads creating an awful lot of force. But we need our hamstrings to be able to control that. Otherwise we're going to start running like the German army, kicking the legs out. So that's eccentric strength, where the hamstrings are actually getting longer, but we're generating force. So that is replicated in something like a Nordic hamstring curl. So getting those into kids and teenagers early on. That being said, very, very intense exercise. We don't need to be doing too many. I'm pretty sure it's something like 2 sets of 8 once a week. I'm pretty sure it is. I'd have to clarify that. So we don't need to do an awful lot of them, but it's something that we can do that has been proven to reduce the incidence of hamstring injuries, but as well just including high speed running into our sessions, and kind of making that a point of our training session. So even if we are kind of playing championship at the weekend, making sure maybe on the Monday or the Tuesday night that we're doing some sprint work as part of that session, that we're continuing to allow the body to adapt to that kind of high speed running. So the more we adapt, the more we get used to something, the more we tolerate it, the more stress and strain is needed to actually break down that structure.
If you go back 20 years, I suppose strength and conditioning is something that wouldn't have been heard. You would have had maybe a physio the day of games. Now, strength and conditioning is that whole area has grown to be huge. Now you see even our own club here now has employed a full-time physio for training and for games. Roll forward 10 years, what do you expect to see within your profession as regards to GA? What strides can we make to benefit the player?
That's a really good question. I think, across the board, it definitely isn't the case that physios are present at all times. And I honestly would at least make a case for there being more of a need for physios to be at training sessions than at games. We can definitely have more of an impact on injury and the progression of recovery if we're seeing athletes before they actually perform. We're very limited into what we can actually do on game day. I think integration with S&C coaches is going to be massive. I really am of the opinion that a sports physio anyway, and an S&C coach are very much on the same spectrum. Just we work with the athletes that are injured down here, we get them so far along that spectrum, and then we start to see them reintegrate back into collective training with the help of the S&C coach. So I do see those two roles kind of being not one and the same, but definitely being an awful lot more collaborative. I suppose, what else do I think? It's a good question. I hadn't considered that before. After that, I'm not sure. God, you're after getting the thought process going there. Where would I like to see it going?
We have you stumped. No, we'll move on. So we had Fergal Horgan on there 2 weeks ago, and we asked him about his game day, or what he did on the day of the game, and he more or less treated it like he was a player. He'd go off for a walk, kind of spend some time with himself the day of a game. As a physio, do you get invested in the team that you're involved with? Do you get nervous for them the day of a game? What's your preparation on game day, on a big game day?
Well, I definitely get invested, and I think some of my behaviour after beating Clare will be very suggestive of that.
Tell us more.
Huh?
Tell us more.
So what was it? 2018, the first year of the round robin series. That was the year Tipperary were playing 4 weekends in a row. The seniors didn't do too well. The minor hurlers did. We won 2 of 4 games. So our last game, the 4th round, we needed to win, and even if we won, it was still up to the other teams because we had a bye the next weekend. And my first cousin was actually a member of the Clare minor panel, and we were playing them in Semple Stadium, so we were very hyped up. We'd after been caught in the hop by Waterford in Limerick. I don't know if you remember, that was the day of the ghost goal. We got beaten in injury time. Huh?
It was no goal.
I think we're winning by...
We were winning the minor considerably.
I think the minors were winning by 10 or 11 points.
And we suffered a couple of injuries. I know there was a discussion afterwards that we were pulling off players, but we really weren't, because we were thinking we had another game to play. But yeah, we got beaten in that game, and I remember kind of going to the dressing room afterwards, and the lads pretty much thinking their championship was over, and just having to remind them that we're still in this. So we went anyway, and we were all geared up for playing Clare in Semple Stadium the following week. And as I was saying, my first cousin was a member of the Clare panel, and it was already dubious enough that I was involved in Tipperary. Like, you know, we're a very Clare hurling family. So to even be involved was like, oh God, how dare you. So that game started, and I honestly, like, that was I couldn't have been less of a Clare person that day. It just didn't kind of enter my mind that I would normally want Clare to win. But anyway, we went down and we beat Clare, I think by 5 or 6 points maybe. And maybe about 45 minutes in, Conor O'Dwyer, Cashel, cornerback, got sent off for hitting one of the Clare players. And I was just so consumed by, oh no, we're down to 14. God, what's going to happen? Match went on anyway, and we won, and off we went into the middle of the pitch, delighted because, you know, we'd achieved what we'd set out to achieve. It was kind of what was out of our hands now, what was going to happen. Delighted, going out and celebrating with all the boys. And then afterwards, I bumped into my auntie, the mother of I think it was my auntie. It was one of the aunties anyway. There's a couple of them there, and how's Fionn? How's the cousin of Fionn? And I was like, what, Fionn? Fionn was the one that was hit. No. when Conor was sent off, I didn't enter my mind. I hadn't paid any attention to what Clare player it was. But at this point now, because Clare had lost, they were knocked out, and I was secretly delighted, but not because of Clare, but because Tipperary had qualified. So yeah, no, I'm definitely very, very much invested in Tipperary.
Mike, did you notice? Mike, did you notice you used the word "we" there a lot?
Oh, 100%.
A lot when talking about Tip.
Oh no, absolutely. And I kind of at the end of that year, I would have been very aware of kind of the environment that you're in, and it not really mattering who the team is, what the crest is, who we're beating, who we're playing.
Yeah.
It very much was we, and I think even over the last couple of years, everyone assumes I'm Tipperary because I'm so invested, but that's just down to being welcomed, being such a part of that team. And I remember, I think it was Tommy Dunn that year, was it Paul Collins or someone, going off on a rant about Clare and how much they hate Clare, and then at the end of it was like, sorry Lauren, and it's like, grand. So no, very, very much a part of the group, and even like with the Tipperary senior footballers who I would have worked with, very much wanting to see them progress, even if they were playing Clare, because it's just, I know the effort that they've put in, I know the guys personally, and I just would be delighted. But back to the question. Good question. Match day. So yeah, match day, I'm probably ahead of the players a lot. I'll be arriving at the pitch. I'll be one of the first. So Tom Hassett was our kit man, Tumi Vara. We would have been first, but he would have been first at whatever venue we would be playing at. And yeah, so I would imagine, like, if it's a game in Semple Stadium, for example, we'll meet in Dr. Morris, and I'll set up, I'll have my table brought in. So before the game, we'll do a lot of our tapings and strappings, because it doesn't really matter when they actually occur. So it's good to get them done good and early. So the lads will be gone out for a puck around, kind of just a bit of a chit chat, maybe have a couple of sandwiches, and I'll have brought in whatever players need to be taped or strapped or potentially assessed. But coming up to match day, that wouldn't be the case. So yeah, they'd all be brought in, assessed, or taped, I should say. After that, then the players would kind of be making their way down to Semple Stadium. So at that point, I'll have brought down whatever I need brought down, my table, my ice bag, my ice box, I have 4 or 5 bags with me at any stage. So I'll go down and set up in Semple Stadium in the medical room. The lads will be getting changed in the dressing room, and then a couple might pop in and out to me. They might want something taped, or they might want Vaseline or whatever it might be. Or maybe some guys, I know that there definitely was a couple of players that kind of use that time as like a period to kind of psychologically gear up for the game. So from a physio perspective, it probably wasn't essential, but if the time is there, they might come in, and that's kind of a place where they can get away from the hustle and bustle of the dressing room and just come into this quiet space. After that, then the players will go out for a puck around. I'll go out with them, because at this point, you'll be double checking tapings. Are they too tight? Are they tight enough? Are they offering enough stability? Some players at this point may want a taping, or someone might get caught, or Vaseline might be wanted. So there'll be a couple of things that you'll just be checking up on, because now they're in that environment, they'll know if they're happy or not with whatever intervention you've applied. The players will go back in then, and then I'm kind of getting ready pitch side. So I have like a big medical bag that would kind of have everything in it, but I don't need everything at every stage. I actually have a small bag that I'll bring onto the pitch. So I'm just kind of be getting those things sorted out. You'll have met the medical team, so the ambulance staff, and just you're going to go over and introduce yourself to those. You'll be designated signals to know if an ambulance is needed or a stretcher is needed. And yeah, at that point, you're just readying yourself on the side of the pitch, waiting for the game to start. You'll get a couple of water bottles. Obviously, it was a little bit different with COVID in terms of having different pieces of equipment ready. But yeah, then you're just getting ready pitch side, and then you're very much immersed in the game, and then kind of waiting to see what happens. Half time can be frantic, and there'll be players you need to check in on. Something might have happened in the first half that you just need to address. Someone might be coming in saying, my ankle's a bit sore, you need to take that. It's a whole host of things that can happen at halftime. And yeah, it depends on the game itself as to what actually occurs during the match. Some games can be very quiet, other games can be mental. This year, the Munster minor final, I was actually only out of hospital about a week, and Jesus, I don't know how many K I ran in that game. It was crazy, the amount of times I was in and out of that pitch. But yeah, it depends really on the game itself.
Very good. You've been involved in a variety of sports. You've been with the women's under-20 rugby team. You're obviously with the Cork Con men's rugby team. The Tip Miners, as we've spoken about, you've done time with the Tip senior footballers for 2 years, the Camogie senior team. So how different is your approach in treating these players when they're injured? Is there a difference, or is it just everyone is a person, so to speak, and you just treat them all the same, or is there a difference between stuff?
I think you kind of have to treat everyone differently, and I don't even mean that between like rugby versus hurling versus football. Everyone has their own way of dealing with an injury. Everyone has their own life stress going on. Everyone else has their own motivation to train and play. So I think everyone has to be treated very much individually, and that would have actually been a reason why I went back to study sports psychology. I think with underage athletes, I love working with younger athletes, because at this point they haven't established bad habits. They haven't, I suppose they're much more open to kind of what I have to say in terms of helping them. They haven't kind of done it this way all their life, so they're going to keep doing it that way. So that's definitely why I enjoy working with underage athletes, maybe that little bit more. When it comes to, let's say, the different sports, there definitely has been a period of learning for me in terms of what would constitute kind of removing a player in hurling might be very different from a player in rugby. So obviously we have a lot more contact and collision in rugby, so I've had to upskill in terms of my on-pitch assessment for that, and obviously my off-pitch clinic assessment and return to play rehab, because the demands are so very different. So like even now I'm watching rugby an awful lot more closely in terms of kind of, well, what does the second row do that the fullback doesn't, and then allowing that to kind of guide my rehab. I suppose in GAA it's a lot more generic. A cornerback isn't going to be doing anything that's majorly different from a midfield in terms of skill set, set pieces and whatnot. But yeah, no, I think across the board, every athlete needs to be taken in whatever way they decide to cope with their injury, and that can be very different depending, as I said, kind of how much they're invested in their sport, other things they have going on, their personality. So yeah, it has to be successful. I think it has to be very individual.
In terms of facilities for physios, what would you like to see in GA grounds across the country? Obviously, I know from my own club here in Guilfoyle, physio, there isn't even a physio room now. It's I mean, so what kind of facilities do you see, or do club grounds need going forward?
I remember one day I was down in the new Kerry GA Centre of Excellence, and I had to go from there to Dr. Morris, and I walked in and it's like the contrast here is significant. They have a physio suite, like it's on the wall, physio suite, and I'm just like
I have an office.
Oh, it was lovely. Like it was so well kitted out, and then having to go back to just a dressing room in Dr. Morris, like it does the job, but you know.
Yeah.
So I suppose, yeah, it would be nice to kind of have, like, I think like we do set up in dressing rooms, and shower areas is a key feature in my physio career in terms of setting up, because it often, more often than not, is the only available space. And then you're rushing in after a match to clear out your stuff before the lads go in for a shower. So it would be nice to have a room that's somewhat warm, because a lot of the time those dressing rooms aren't warm, that's well lit. You have to, like, especially in Dr. Morris, you're adjusting lads to, like, will you stand that way so I actually have the light to come down to see what's actually happening. So yeah, warm and brightly lit would be nice. But I suppose after that, like, there's very little, like a mirror would be nice, because that helps in terms of demonstrating movements and highlighting maybe movement deficiencies. It would be lovely to have a gym scenario. So I'm blessed in that I have that down here in Cork Con. They have a very well kitted out gym. So I'd say a lot of the time in Dr. Morris, I would have had to describe to the lads what I want them to do, because I just didn't have the facilities to be able to show them. In a perfect scenario, I'd be in the gym actually coaching the players through their rehab, but we don't have the facilities for that, nor do we have the time, so we're very limited in terms of the time that we can spend with players. So that's one benefit to COVID at the moment. I can get in and spend a lot more time with the guys. So yeah, some sort of gym setup would be lovely, because physio has definitely moved away from just being a hands-on profession. It really isn't anymore, and I think if anyone is still stuck in that kind of era, we're probably letting our players down in some regards. And yeah, after that, like, even just like an area to chill out, relax, something that, like, I don't know, there has been plans for Thurles and different kind of upgrades and whatnot, but that would be nice. I know in Munster there is a chill out room where there's bean bags and PlayStations and bunk beds and the whole lot, just to chill out, because that's really important as well, especially kind of for the guys that are injured. Because if they aren't training and training is ongoing, they're probably just camped out in the dressing room, or maybe trying to go in and coax Pat for a cup of tea. But that's probably left to me to get.
If we put PlayStations into Dr. Morris, they'll always be injured, Lauren. So at the moment, you're currently part of an international research team investigating the psychological effects of COVID-19 and subsequent cancellation of sport in high-performance athletes. How much of an impact has COVID had on athletes, especially in the GA, in your opinion?
It has affected them. So we've seen their well-being scores reduced in comparison to what they would have been. But they've actually dealt with it quite well. So I would have looked at well-being, resilience, coping strategies, motivation, emotional intelligence, all these different constructs. And they've dealt with it quite well. And it's comparable to the Olympic cohort here in Ireland. So we would have looked at, the group as a whole would have looked at the Olympic athletes that are qualified or are in search of qualification, or the professional rugby players here in Ireland. So our studies would have differed slightly depending on the sample, but they are very much similar in terms of their well-being. Their coping strategies is an interesting thing. Very adaptive, so we can have adaptive or maladaptive coping strategies. So kind of avoidance type strategies would be negative, or will be seen as negative, and they are at the bottom of the list. So our athletes would have been quite positive in terms of their coping strategies, and then we would have seen that result, seen that in their well-being. So with like resilience is kind of where my main focus is at the moment. And we have two types of resilience. We have resilience that we kind of can continue to function at the level that we're functioning at, and then we can have what we call emergent resilience, which is where our well-being drops because the stress has just become so much. It's very large in terms of magnitude. Our well-being drops, and then it actually comes back up. It regains it to normal levels, if not exceeding that. And that's the pathway of resilience that we're seeing. We aren't even seeing kind of that jump back up to normal just yet, because that would occur normally when the stressor is gone. And the stressor definitely isn't gone here. And we're seeing COVID is still a major issue in sport, is severely affected by that. But in terms of kind of a general outlook, our athletes have done really well. And I was delighted to get over 600 inter-county GAA athletes. And as part of that, we would have looked at injury as well, amongst other factors in collaboration with the GPA and WGPA. So yeah, as a whole, doing really well, but I think we'll see things improve once we do get back to normal, and we'll see that kind of post-traumatic growth as a result of kind of enduring the stressor. So yeah, it's been challenging. So athletes do have a kind of a collection of resources that they would normally go to when they are faced with something that's adverse or is a stressor. So it's like injury or retirement or deselection, or these are all things that athletes kind of expect to happen, and they have their list of resources, and one of those would be social support. So that is going to your physio, speaking to your sports psychologist, talking to your friends and family, and typically we would see that would be really helpful, and that would be very much correlated with well-being. But in this instance, that hasn't been illustrated at all. There's no correlation between social support and well-being, and that's because everyone is going through the COVID-19 crisis. So it's new to sports psychologists, it's new to physios, it's new to everyone. So no one kind of had that knowledge to impart and to kind of reassure athletes early days, because the knowledge or the information wasn't there. So that definitely was an interesting finding. It's not surprising, but it definitely is kind of a shift away from what we normally would see when it comes to stressful situations.
You've previously been part of, or maybe possibly still are part of, the National Youth Committee. You might give us a rundown on the GAA Youth Forum and probably the major takeaway you took from your involvement in that.
Yeah, so I was involved with that over 6 years. So I'm only allowed to serve 2 terms, unfortunately. It's like the American presidency, you can only do 2 terms. So I would have started my involvement with that back when I was 19. I actually presented at GAA Congress. And as a result of that, I was invited to serve on the National GAA Youth Committee. So it's similar to like the Fixtures Committee, the Disciplinary Committee. It's just another subsidiary of Central Council. And our role, I suppose, specifically was to engage with the youth membership of the GAA, so to kind of facilitate a dual channel of communication, so that the organization as a whole were able to communicate with younger members, but equally those younger members could feed back to Central Council and to the kind of the powers that be. So the whole point of the youth forum was to use that time to collect information and pass it to those that kind of can do something about that. And then we also, because that involved maybe 300, 400, 500, 600, 600 people, depending on the year that was, coming to Croke Park, we also used it as a time to offer the youth information. So we would have ran many workshops covering all things from physical preparation, injury prevention, nutrition, psychological intervention, inclusivity and equality within the association, refereeing. Like, we covered literally everything. There were amazing days, and it was a privilege to be involved with them. But we used that time to collect feedback from younger members that was directly given back to the GAA president and was presented at each subsequent Congress, like General Congress. And it was nice to see some of the different counties actually addressing some of the issues, or at least referencing some of those issues. So, like, obviously you have to take information from a lot of sources in order to make these decisions, but it was nice to kind of offer them a useful outlook. And for the last maybe two, I think it was the last two youth forums that we actually had Youth Congress where there was votes taken, and we had John Horan, we had the LGFA president, we had Kathleen Woods, the Camogie president, present at those actual days. So it would have involved kind of discussion, roundtable discussion, a vote, and also kind of an explanation from those presidents as to why those rules are in place, or what kind of factors or barriers might be in the way of changing those rules. So I think it was nice to have that kind of interaction between the younger population and the powers that be. So yeah, we have achieved a lot with the youth forum. It was definitely an attractive event because it was taking place in Croke Park. We even had a free taking workshop one day out in the pitch. It was class. I loved them. Half of the time I was just trying to organise an event that I know I'd love. But yeah, it was cool. We've had some amazing speakers down through the years. Like the people that have bought into it have been amazing. Like God, you had Cora Staunton, Kieran Kilkenny, David Goff. I got everyone, like the two Johnny, like we had literally everyone that's anyone in the GA was probably invited to a youth forum, which was great to see. Very
good. So earlier on you mentioned that there was, I suppose, issues between the Camogie and Ladies Football Association around, I suppose, and that's more or less around fixtures, because we've seen it here in Tip where Orla the Wire has had to play 2 games possibly in the one day, and like that's at club level here, even in Tipperary, because we have a good ladies football club here and the Cartier, the Camogie club, that are associated with us, and that's happened. I mean, they've had to play on the same weekend or within 24 hours of each other. Would you like to see the Camogie and Ladies Football Associations come under the GA umbrella, or especially, I suppose, that they need to work better together rather than against each other?
Yeah, I think it's baffling at times as to how some decisions can be arrived at. Like, you'd wonder, like, whose interests do you have at heart here in a lot of instances. And I think even last year, when you look at the Care Camogie Club and Football Club that were asked to play 2 finals in one weekend, I think it was, especially when there was a free weekend the following weekend or something, like it was just baffling. I would like to see them come under the one organisation. I know even from the youth forum, like that would have been a question we would have asked, and it would have been an overwhelming yes, let's bring them together, and a lot of people wouldn't even be aware that they're separate organisations. I suppose even I would like to see them come together, but even to kind of still remain, I suppose, different columns under the same house, if that makes sense. Because I think if it was absorbed into just one organisation with one overseeing committee or board or whatever it might be, the individual kind of barriers that exist in each sport might be lost somewhat. But even, I suppose, if it's possible, like to kind of build a relationship where kind of weekly meetings are a thing that's just done, you know, and understanding that players want to play both sports, and if it's possible, let's make it happen. You know, I think a lot of the time, and it's definitely referenced sometime when this discussion is brought up, that everyone's kind of looking after themselves and just wanting their own, kind of look after their own ship. But I think we have to recognise that it's the same players playing both sports. And yeah, we're already seeing kind of numbers dwindling. Like when we look at the playing population of Camogie versus LGFA, there's a stark contrast there. But even from the perspective of kind of the two organisations joining the GA, we're going to see access to facilities that little bit more. We're going to see more one club models, and I know we have some of them across the country already, and like they only seem to be having kind of positive outcomes. So yeah, I have yet to meet someone with a good enough reason to keep them separate.
Yeah. So Larry McCarthy obviously has taken over as the new GA president. He has made that a priority, and he also spoke on, I suppose, the imbalance of women in key administrative roles within the GA. What's your view on that situation, and how should it be addressed?
God, I'm not sure. Like, I think you see the 20 by 20 campaign, and it's can't see, can't be. So it was nice to see the likes of Tracy Kennedy in Cork having such a prominent position, and I've seen her speak an awful lot about being a female in that position, but something she would have also spoken about is how she never saw anyone coming after her, that it's great for her to have held the Cork GAA chairperson's position, but to not see someone kind of coming in the ranks behind her. So I think, yeah, it's of huge importance that there are more females, even if not just to broaden the opinions to like, you know, I think women have an awful lot to offer, even like from my own experience being a female in a very male dominated environment when it comes to, let's say, physiotherapy, just seeing kind of the different outlooks that can be brought by bringing in different genders, because that brings in different life experience. I think it is really important. It's the getting in, it's the joining the club initially is where the barrier is. So I would have spoken previously there about speaking at Congress. I was the only female, I was 19 years old, the only female that spoke at Congress that year. Like, not even, like, as in full stop, there was no other female. And to be 19 years of age and to kind of have that, you know, I suppose it was quite nice at the time, but still it's a bit baffling. And then to look down and see like very few females, maybe a handful. But then, like, even say at that point, to kind of not even be acknowledged by Claire at that time, you know, like that's where like you need to be nurturing those women that are trying to kind of stake a claim and kind of make them feel more included. They want to be included, so let's kind of welcome them to the club in some regards. Like, even I've had experience working with the National GAA Youth Committee for 6 years, yet I wouldn't know where to start if I went to a county convention. I just I would feel out of place completely. So I at the same time, I don't think gender quotas is a place to start. People should be there on merit, and I'll 100% back that. It's just trying to, I don't know, the disconnect between kind of the higher echelons of the GAA as an organisation and then the actual kind of ground level kind of county convention, club convention. There definitely is kind of a difference in the two, and I'm not sure how to actually bridge that gap.
Yeah, well, I have to agree with you. I was at Congress in 2018 down in 2019 in Wexford, and Tracy Kennedy spoke, and she was one of the most impressive speakers at Congress that year. And I've since followed her on Twitter, and I find her to be an exceptional GAA administrator, and I hope that she is not lost to the association, as can happen, I suppose, when she's reached the pinnacle of Cork GAA. And I would like to see Croke Park take her in for some role, because I think she has so much to offer. But I did a straw poll before we came on of in my division, we're West Tipperary, and with 15 clubs, there's 5 female secretaries, and there's a couple of PROs, but there's no chairperson who's female. And now, we did have one last year. Cashel actually had a female chairperson, but females don't seem to go into the chairperson role and within the GAA, and you'd see a lot of secretaries. And
that's really even playing into like gender stereotypes in a way. And I think, it's personally speaking now, I think women are probably a little bit more aware of their limitations and are conscious of kind of going for a position that they may or may not feel they're qualified for. And in some instances, maybe they are, but I feel like they perhaps don't have the confidence to kind of go and be the person that is leading the club or leading the community, that they're content with having a role. And yeah, that's something I'd like to see change, but I don't know, is that just a gender kind of characteristic? But it's interesting that it's secretaries that we're seeing. But even I like, at times I'm very vocal on social media, and a lot of the time you can have like, you can try to put your opinion across, and like, from personally anyway, it's very much trying to improve a situation or to help someone. But then you are getting kind of faced with sexist remarks or, you know, comments that a man would never receive. And I think if you don't put yourself in those positions, you're not going to get those remarks. So potentially, is that a factor here at play too? I don't know the answer to it. I wish I did. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of barriers there. It's just, how do we overcome them? And it's a pity that we've had Tracy come and go, and obviously she had to leave as a result of just GAA rules, but to not see someone like her on the way behind her, especially when she's paved such a path.
Absolutely.
So yeah,
just on girls in sport, like we spoke about, the LGFA probably have one of the biggest numbers now playing. It's one of the fastest growing sports in the country. Camogie has certainly taken off again in the last 10 years. And what would we still see girls walking away from sport in their teenage years? Is there something more that can be done to keep girls involved in sport?
I think there's a couple of factors. It's bad to say, but like I went from being involved with the Tipperary senior camogie team to the Tipperary minor hurling team, and it was stark the resources that were offered to 15 and 16-year-old lads that weren't being offered to grown women that had played for Tipperary for 10 years. I think resources and just the environment that's created is a massive thing. Like even the coaches that you might see, coaches want to coach men's teams. The best coaches go towards male sports. And even like that's something I would have experienced as a player is poor coaching and poor management and poor interaction and communication with players. And just an environment that's created that you just don't want to be in. And that's just from personal experience. I think that's one factor. And then a second factor is, just resources and especially when it kind of comes to county level, when you're putting so much on the line, like you're spending so much time traveling to and from training and making all these sacrifices that you're not getting fed, or you're being put on pitches that are in the back arse of nowhere. You're like in poor conditions, terrible facilities. So I think like a very tangible thing we can do is increase or improve those resources. And then we're creating a nice environment. If we don't create a nice environment, we're not going to keep girls in sport. And like I was lost to sport as a result of some of the kind of environments that I was put into. So I think that's really important. And I know the LGFA have put on a huge number of projects, and I know Orla Farmer is involved in many of those. And that is hugely about just kind of improving the resources, making it easy, kind of giving a toolbox to people to use. And I think that's a really good starting place. You're always going to have people kind of being lost to sport once you reach a certain age. Like technically I was lost to sport. I stopped playing. I just found my interest was still in sport, just in a different perspective or in a different role within sport. So like there always is going to be that drop off at a certain age, just when people go to college, realize what they want to do with their life, what they want to be. But I think a really easy place to start is just looking at resources, the effectiveness of coaches, or even just the kind of just looking at the coach's behavior and in the environment that the coach creates, and then trying to eliminate some of those very easy factors that isn't even related to money in a lot of regards. But again, a very hard question. I'm not going to have an easy answer.
Do labels annoy you, as in ladies football and camogie as opposed to just women's hurling and women's football? Is that... I remember I had a camogie trainer a couple of years ago. Whenever we go off running, it'd be, "Come on, ladies," and I was just like, "Oh God." But yeah, it does. Even like you see kind of segments in papers or online, women in sport. Like, why can't it just be sport? Like, I just don't understand. And I know there has to be a certain drive for increasing media coverage and whatnot. But when can we just have rugby? And it's men this week and it's women next week. Like, why is it the women's team? And then it's just the Irish team versus the women's Irish team. And it's just a pity that we do have to label it. I don't know, it's indicative of it kind of, this is a different level. Like, it isn't just a different gender. It's like, this is a level below the men's team or whatever it might be. I don't play football. So yeah, I wish it was just called football. I'm not sure kind of the need for ladies football. I know camogie I'm perfectly fine with because it's just the name of the game, it's women's hurling. I don't know, would that make any difference? But yeah, ladies Gaelic football, I don't know, I think it's just a whole kind of, as opposed to gentlemen's ladies football or
gentlemen's football, men's football. Yeah. But yeah, just like women in sport, I don't know, it's just the longer we kind of segregate the coverage, the more it's going to be segregation in real life or something.
So just moving away a little bit from sport, you have a very prominent media career developing. Is that something that you always aspire to, or is it something that you've fallen into and grabbed hold of?
Completely fallen into. I actually worked with Spin Southwest when I was in college, and I had no intention whatsoever, because if I did, it would have been a great start. I actually left there to go to Dublin to start working as a physio. But no, it fell into my lap, really. Pundit Arena, who are going from strength to strength now, would have approached me back in the end of 2015. They were a very small 9-man business at the time, and they wanted to kind of expand their GA coverage. And I suppose I had participated in Miss Ireland at this time, and I would have been very vocal about GA on Twitter, so I think it was just kind of an easy fit for them. I had no experience. I remember, it's gas looking back now, the very first interview I did was with Shane McGrath outside Semple Stadium, and if it ever surfaces, and like, he would have been starting his media career at the time too, so he would have grasped every opportunity. But like, I look back now, and like, we'd be very good friends from the minors, and it's just like, let's just never speak about that again.
That material.
We're going to have to look for that. Yeah, is it
for Shane? I wanted for Shane.
But so that's, yeah, I just kind of started, and like, that wouldn't have been paid. I just love going to matches. So like, yeah, I'll go to Thurles on a Sunday, or I'll go to Páirc Uí Chaoimh, or I'll go to Galway, or wherever it might be. So that's kind of where it started. And then it kind of grew legs a little bit. So that was the first year of it. No one really knew who we were. Second year, people were kind of lining up because they knew the Pundit Arena videos or whatever. And then I just kind of kept taking opportunities. So in that second year, Pundit Arena would have been the media partners for the Fenway Hurling Classic. And they would have provided funds for Brian Barry to go and cover the event. But I was kind of like, maybe I'll go too. So I actually paid for my own flights, booked time off work, didn't get paid for it. So like, I fully funded it myself, but I just knew that kind of there was a door open there for me. So if it was pushed, that I could definitely get in there. And yeah, just kind of, it was opportunities like that where you start to network and you kind of build that profile for yourself. The following year then I applied for a job with Red FM in Cork here, didn't get it, but they were very impressed with my desire to kind of get into this industry. So they actually trained me up, and I was taken on as a part-time employee, which was amazing. So it's just little things like that. And I suppose the fact that I had physio as my primary income meant that I could kind of work and not get paid, because it didn't massively impact me. I was still getting an income. But I just thoroughly enjoyed it. I'll go to any game. I remember, as a result of Pundit Arena, I got to go to the Ulster football final in Clonus. That was some experience. Or getting to go to the Galway homecoming in Pearse Stadium and things like that. But yeah, it's definitely just something that's kind of gathered momentum over the last few years, to the point where kind of balls.ie came looking for me because of the social media coverage that I do. And it got to the point where one day I had the opportunity of covering France and Ireland in the under-20 Six Nations, where I had one patient in private practice. And I was like, I don't want to be left with that decision any longer. So at that point, I kind of thought I had enough going, and I was presenting the Little Woods Ireland coverage at the time as well, of the Camogie Leagues. So I said, no, it's now or never. So I actually left my very good full-time employment with John Casey and Nina, and I'm so grateful for everything that he's done for me. But I felt at that time it was kind of now or never. I have no qualifications in media. I need to ride the wave as long as it's going. And it also kind of benefited my physio work too, especially because I've been tip over the last kind of year or so too, in that now that I don't have a 9 to 5, like I make my physio role my full-time job. So that's kind of where, like, my priority will always be the physio role that I'm in. It just means that I have an awful lot more time. So I'll get to Semple Stadium 2 hours before I need to be there, because I have the time to do that, and like it allows me more time with players. But yeah, from a media perspective, I'm just kind of having the crack, doing what I'm doing. I definitely prefer physio. Very easy for me. You can either commentate or interview someone about what they've done or did and observe it from the press box, or you can be a part of it, and nothing will beat, you know, having that winning feeling on the sideline in Thurles, or being on the sideline in Croke Park and kind of feeling the victories but also suffering the defeats too. It just it's a very different feeling, and as well the collective element of it as well is really important. Like that's something I've missed with COVID, is not being able to go and see the gang, you know, and Dr. Morris 3 times a week and just having the general chit chat, you know, like that's a huge part of it from like my social life as well, you know.
And you mentioned social media, and you have a very big social media presence. Great tutorial on concussion today, actually. But social media can be, I suppose, a double-edged sword. And have you had any experience of abuse, or have you managed to steer clear of it?
I don't think I get that much. I will get the odd message here or there, but I don't really take it to heart. It's obviously not nice to kind of receive a message, but like I think my approach to social media is I want to help people. I wouldn't be, I suppose it isn't very centered on me and maybe my appearance. It's very much centered on me and my knowledge and trying to help other people using the profile that I've built. So I think I probably don't get what other people might get as a result of that, but I definitely do at times, and I think it's definitely more reflective of that person's mindset than it is of my content. So I have to remind myself of that. Actually, as gas, I was getting some abuse from someone on TikTok recently, and the whole vein of the abuse was that I was kind of talking negatively about Tipperary people, and I was like, this. I was just waiting for them to be like, "What's your problem with Tip people?" And I'd be like, sorry, no, hold on here a second." So like it's very much kind of what they perceive based on the very small piece of information that I've given them. So like in that regard, I could have been like, "Here, girl, it's been 4 years, Tipperary till I die." Like, you know, it's interesting. So yeah, I don't think I ever read too much into it because they know a snippet of like 25 years of my life. So I won't give them too much time in my head.
Good. We mentioned your dad earlier on, and he obviously finished hurling before '95. I think you probably have answered this already, but was that a disappointment? Does it still rankle that he missed out on those glory years, I suppose, for Clare hurling?
We've actually spoken about this recently, and I think it definitely did hurt him at the time that he was kind of stuck in this like phase afterwards of like being there in Croke Park in '95 and like wanting Clare to win because he's given his life to Clare hurling, but at the same time knowing that if Clare win, he's not a part of that group. Yeah. Especially when he had been for so long, like he'd been the captain before Anthony Daly. So I do think it definitely weighed on him a little bit. Kind of what could have been, but he's a very intelligent man. He's a very compassionate man, and I think he won't let it kind of sit with him too long. And I think he could have easily kind of held a grudge with that and not kind of pursued a coaching career or even a playing career after that. But like he played until was it a year or two before he had his hip replaced? Yeah, something nuts. And he's still coaching, and he would have coached the Clare under 14s, 15s, 16s and minors and intermediates. And then like even in recent years, he's gone back to coach the Clare under 15 B team. Like he just lives and breathes hurling. So he definitely didn't let it kind of affect him for too long. And he has spoken about like, he would have identified as being a hurler or a Clare hurler and then having to kind of change that identity after that was taken away from him in a sense. I think he probably would have preferred stepping away rather than it being taken away, but I suppose that's the name of the game. I think it's not Gerald Clan has that persona. We're not really surprised at that either, are we? So yeah, no, I think it probably has also helped him in terms of empathy for players that he has had to kind of deal with, and like as Clare minor manager and that having to drop players and knowing how that feels. So I definitely think he's probably learned a lot from it as well, which has helped him in later years.
Yeah. So you've obviously mentioned Gerald Loughnane, Seamus Jarrett. your dad, like Fecal has a huge history in Clare club hurling. Is the club still a big part of your identity? Would you consider Fecal GA to be part of you?
It's a good question. I've been away from Fecal a long time now. And
hold on a minute, you're 25. It's not a long time.
A long time. Since I was 17, a long time. I think like the GA, it's like I don't know, AIB a couple of years ago had this one life, one club kind of tagline. But I think I am very lucky in that I've been able to immerse myself in other environments, and like Tipperary is one of those. So even at times I'm very kind of distant from like the club scene in Tipperary, but like I'm like fully immersed in the county scene. And you know, even at times where like I couldn't tell you half those minor lads clubs, because to me they were just part of this team and this is the only team. So I think I'm lucky in that I've been able to kind of spread my wings and immerse myself deeply in other environments. When I've been a bit older, I've only really got experience with Fecal as a player, and I didn't have the most positive experience. I actually remember when I was 16, I was only speaking about this the other day. I let a player strike when I was 16. So that'll tell you now about some of the politics that went on.
That's why you're fitting in Cork so well.
It was warranted. We ended up winning the championship afterwards. That's all I'm going to say. But yeah, we definitely had I had a rocky experience at a club level, and I definitely felt very, very lost. And I think a lot of that too is down to I'm a very competitive person by nature, and I didn't have the tools to make myself a very good player. I didn't know how to physically perform, or I didn't know how to mentally prepare myself for games, and that's why I've kind of gone down that route of study now, that if I was to go back playing, I'd be a very different player. So no, I think I'm very lucky in that I'll go to a Clare game, or I'll go to whatever game it might be, and I'm just like, if it's a really good game, and if both sides are very respectful of one another, then I'm happy with kind of whatever the outcome is. So I'm like, and that's even down here in Cork. I've definitely been immersed into the Cork kind of club scene as well as county because of working with Red FM, and just being able to appreciate a good game when you see it, and kind of good people when you see them, and that's something I kind of count myself very lucky for, because a lot of people are just in one environment and kind of that's all they get to experience, whereas I can kind of be a bit of a bandwagoner in a sense, but I get to kind of experience the positive sides to that.
Very good. Before we finish up, a couple of quick fire questions, one word answers will do. Any abuse dished out to you back home when you got involved with Tip?
Oh, plenty. God, yeah. Jesus, too many to answer.
The split season, is it a good result for the players?
Yes, definitely.
If you could have your choice of job anywhere in the world, what would it be?
I have a funny story actually about this. It's Tipperary related. If I give me 2 seconds. So I remember back when I was a teenager, I filled out this little like magazine thing. I must have been maybe 13, and it was like dream job. And I honestly, I still have it at home. It was like physio for the Tip senior hurlers. I was honestly 13 or 14 in East Clare in Fecal, like. And then, so a couple of years later, then I was like, I've done physio for the Tipperary senior footballers. So I think I've that goal achieved. So tick. But now what my dream job would be, I'm actually reading Eddie Jones's book at the moment. And for some reason, my dream job at the moment is physio with England. Don't ask me why.
Oh, wow.
Now you know, now you feel how my family felt when I started working with Tip.
Could you see yourself taking on
we can edit that bit out if you want.
Could you see yourself taking on a coaching or management role in the future?
Yes, most definitely. I think I've taken or absorbed a lot. I got to work under Tommy Dunn for a year and it was invaluable. Like, so I think I've learned a lot. I hate to not pass that on.
Okay, maybe that might answer this question. Best team environment you've ever been involved in?
2018 Tipperary Minors. We got to the Ireland semi-final, beat Clare, won the Munster final, got to work with Tommy Dunn. Yeah, it was just brilliant. Best summer in terms of weather as well. So hands down, brilliant.
Johnny B or Johnny Snacks?
Was that your I was just going to say, was that your first time working in Croke Park as well?
As physio, yeah.
As a physio, yeah.
Yeah, it was amazing. I know we lost, but it was the match after. I always say that was the best match I've ever been at because we had a perfect seat as well.
It was the Cork and Limerick.
Yeah, we were just with the Limerick subs. Yeah.
Oh right, yeah.
It was class. So at the end of it, we'd already forgotten we'd lost.
Okay, I'm not going to let you away with it. Johnny B or Johnny Snags?
They're very different people. It's hard. I'd probably contact Smacks an awful lot more.
Okay, Maura Fay or Lauren Gulfoyle?
Well, I have to say myself.
Very good. So just before we finish up, All-Ireland winner in hurling 2021?
Oh, that's like any other year I'd have an answer for you, but this year I was like, it's a complete mental game. If it's depending now on the structure of it, if it's very short and snappy, I'll say Limerick. If it's drawn out, it could be, because I think the mental aspect of it will definitely come into play and kind of not having an awful lot of time with players. I'd say Limerick, but I'm putting an asterisk beside that, depending when I hear championship structures.
Football.
We like to put an asterisk beside Limerick. All Ireland wins. All right, it's all right.
Football. Oh, I think we'll definitely see some sort of response from Kerry, but again, I think it depends on the season. Like Dublin are going to could sleepwalk that regardless of what the championship structure is. But if it's a kind of more traditional, I would think Kerry are definitely going to have a part to play in that. Camogie. Let me see. Well, I think Waterford will have a huge say, but I don't think they're going to win it. I'd be surprised if there wasn't a response from Cork again this year. I think it's indicative that Paddy Murray is still involved, and he's pretty much got the same team available to him, obviously minus Gemma O'Connor. So I think Cork would be a strong bet.
Ladies football.
Ladies football again. I think it's all down to championship, but like Dublin. Mick Bowen has his team in order there. I know Budrick is after getting injured over in Oz, and I'm not sure he'll be too happy about that. Yeah. But yeah, I think potentially Mayo. I know that they've gotten their Carnacon players back as well this year, so they probably will have a huge say. But I think the championship structure will have a huge impact on a lot of it. A full season with no distractions is very different from a kind of a short, snappy knockout. Yeah.
Will the Tipsy-Inner footballers hold on to their crown in Munster?
Oh, does lightning strike twice? I have no recollection of the game versus Mayo. I was dosed up in hospital, so that did not happen. And I didn't get to watch the Munster final because I was also dosed up in hospital. I think it'd be very hard to replicate it. I think Bloody Sunday definitely played into their motivations on that day, which I very much expected it to. But yeah, as I was saying, I think we're going to be expecting a response from Kerry. I don't think anyone's going to be left in their wake this year.
And the Munster Hurling final, you've already said Limerick.
Yeah, I think it'll be Limerick or Waterford. That being said, there's always kind of a question mark over Cork. Tipperary, again, they probably bowed out earlier than expected last year. But yeah, even when you consider the conditions Limerick and Tip played in last year, Jesus, it was biblical. I've run down the marina there a couple of times since, and that was only a fraction of what the weather was like that day. So yeah, I think when are the matches going to happen is a factor as well,
Yeah, a question I forgot to ask you during it was the cross-coders obviously is very good for footballers and some hurlers here in the country. Ashley McCarthy and Orla Dwyer from Tip are down there. You have the Kellys from Mayo, Cora Staunton, Aisling Sheridan, Sinead Goldrick, you just mentioned she got injured there lately. Do you think that is great for women in Ireland to get to go to Australia and encounter that sort of environment?
In its current state, it is, because I know those girls are coming back and they're most definitely going to be demanding standards in the county setups when they return. They'll have experience of what they should be experiencing. I know there is question marks over that season being extended, and that will bring to an end the tradition of players going and coming back. But I think having experienced kind of on the inside a senior camogie kind of camp, I think they are being shortchanged, and it's through no fault of, let's say, the Tipperary Camogie Board or anything like that at all. It's just as a result of income that's disposable to them. But I think if the opportunity is there for them to go and play and be appropriately reimbursed for that, then more power to them. It's up to the LGFA and Camogie Association to raise the game here. But yeah, no, I think fair play to them. I'm extremely jealous. I'd love to be Sarah Rowe, line out for Collingwood. It would be class. You can see kind of what that's done for her profile, and kind of she's a great person. Right? You know, these are all great people. I'm very jealous of them, especially when they're able to live it up in Australia now and we're not.
You know, it looks great. Lauren Gulfoyle, it was an absolute pleasure. Thanks very much. We kept you longer than I thought we would, but it was excellent, and thanks very much.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, that's all we have time for this week, folks, on the Premier View podcast. Thanks a million to Lauren Gulfoyle for coming all the way from Fecal to meet myself and Marty. And